He seems to believe that he is completely innocent of any wrongdoing. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Read the Right Thing Book Reviews. I'm Eric, your host. Thanks so much for tuning in. Yes, it is time for my yearly review of Kurt Vonnegut. Mother Night is, I believe, the fourth Kurt Vonnegut novel, published in 1962. Although I keep seeing contradictory evidence of whether Cat's Cradle or Mother Night came first. So if you know which was published first, please let me know in the comments. Although my book does have a copyright of 1962, and a list I looked online did have this before Cat's Cradle. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on. The novel is a fictional confessional memoir of Howard W. Campbell Jr., an American by birth, Nazi by reputation. Just a heads up, there will be some minor, possibly major spoilers in this review. I'll try not to give too much away, but just know that I enjoyed the book and I would highly recommend it. Is it weird to say you enjoyed a book about Nazis? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not exactly sure. But that's what reading Vonnegut is like, and that's why he's so enjoyable. You read about some of the darkest moments in time, some of the most evil people, mingled with hilarious prose and thoughts that are just really enjoyable to read. I guess you could say Vonnegut makes the horrible enjoyable. But if you wish to remain spoiler-free, go read the book, and then please come back to this review. So back to the review and a little bit about Mother Night. Campbell was an American German who later became a Nazi propagandist / American spy. Campbell is awaiting trial in an Israeli jail where he writes his story. He tells the story of his life and the rise of the Nazi Party. With the rise of the Nazi, Campbell decided to stay behind in Germany instead of flee with his parents. He was a famous playwright, and his wife Helga was also a famous actress, and he really wanted to remain out of the war. Campbell would have loved to just continue to write plays and love his wife, but that is not the world he lives in. Insanity descends upon him. Times of war requires that you be deceptive, forcing you to choose sides, basically. His world is full of people doing what they need to do to survive. Are they good people? Can a Nazi propagandist be good if he is undercover for the Americans? That is a really good question because he obviously causes a lot of harm, and we never know what level of good he causes. What about a Jewish man who joins the SS to survive? Are these bad people doing what they need to do to survive? Can you blame anyone for doing what they need to do to survive? So this all started when a United States agent named Frank Werdeman recruits Campbell to be an American spy. Campbell makes his way up through the Nazi ranks due to his fame and his way with words. Campbell starts a radio program aimed to convert Americans to the Nazi cause. However, the idiosyncrasies of his broadcast is code to pass along to the Americans. A cough, a pause, or stutter could mean vital information to American forces. Campbell claims that although he played the part of a convincing Nazi propagandist, he never believed the words in his heart. Vonnegut inserts himself into this story. He also implements the use of a literary device called metafiction, a style of prose narrative in which attention is directed to the process of fictive composition. He takes us even further by alluding to Campbell and his memoirs as being real. Although we know it is a work of fiction, it is framed as a real memoir being edited by Kurt Vonnegut. I like this choice because Campbell could have easily been a real person during World War II. And although we know it's fiction, it also uses true events and people of historical significance. So Vonnegut frames the text as a real memoir. He even writes an introduction and an editor's note about the editing process. In the introduction, which I believe was added to later editions, Vonnegut says that this is the only story of his that he knows the moral of. This is the only story of mine whose moral I know. I don't think it's a marvelous moral. I simply happen to know what it is. We are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful about what we pretend to be. My personal experience with Nazi monkey business was limited. There were some vile and lively Native American fascists in my hometown of Indianapolis during the 30s, and somebody slipped me a copy of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, I remember, which was supposed to be the Jews' secret plan for taking over the world. And I remember some laughs about my aunt, too, who married a German, and who had to write to Indianapolis for proofs that she had no Jewish blood. The Indianapolis mayor knew her from high school and dancing school, so he had fun putting ribbons and official seals all over the documents the Germans required, which made them look like 18th century peace treaties. After a while, the war came and I was in it, and I was captured, so I got to see a little of Germany from the inside while the war was still going on. I was a private, a battalion scout, and under the terms of the Geneva Convention, I had to work for my keep, which was good, not bad. I didn't have to stay in prison all the time, somewhere out in the countryside. I got to go to a city, which was Dresden, and to see the people and the things they did. Of course, Vonnegut would be in Dresden during the bombing, and that would have a great impact on him and his later work. So knowing the moral of the story and knowing that Campbell had a popular Nazi radio makes for some interesting questions. Is Campbell good or bad? Is he lying about his internal commitment to the Nazis? Was he even an American spy in the first place? Based on this moral, Vonnegut would say he's a Nazi, while Campbell would like to think that he still maintains some goodness. Many of the Nazis in the story, and more specifically Campbell's father-in-law, Werner Noth, say that Campbell's words inspired them even more than Hitler's. We don't know what good his secret codes could have caused to others. It is never mentioned. But Werner says that Campbell could have never served the Americans as good as he served the Nazis. The moral of the story is important, especially because everyone in the story is not who they pretend to be. After the war, Campbell narrowly escapes hanging and is allowed to go to New York City to resume his life. In New York City, he lives a life of isolation, assuming his wife Helga died in the war. One day, after many years, he decides to carve some chess pieces. And when you carve chess pieces, you obviously need someone to play with. And he meets an old neighbor named George Kraft, who ends up being the closest thing he has to a friend, and also isn't who he pretends to be. Eventually, some Nazis and even Helga resurface in his life. The newspaper break the news that the Nazi Campbell has been among them this entire time. His quiet life of solitude is upended, and suddenly everyone, Americans, Israelis, and even Russians, wants a piece of him. This was a very good novel written by Kurt Vonnegut. It is really the first Vonnegut novel to lose the science fiction aspect. No aliens, no flying saucers, no post-apocalyptic narrative. It's all true and could have happened. It's also the first novel of his to really adopt the narrative of World War II. He would later combine World War II and science fiction to produce probably his best work, Slaughterhouse-Five. When I decided to read these Kurt Vonnegut novels in order, I was interested to see how he would evolve as an author. And in my opinion, he improves as a novelist with each book. Don't get me wrong, I think he's been great basically since Sirens of Titan. And even his first book, although it doesn't have his traditional style, is still really good. I've thoroughly enjoyed every Vonnegut novel I've read, but he continues to hone his voice and really economize the story structure to write some incredible novels. They each improve upon each other, and I'm not sure if I have a favorite. Usually my favorite Vonnegut novel is whichever one I read last. I think he really found his voice in Cat's Cradle. Short, punchy sentences that are packed with meaning and morals. I think Mother Night might be his best structured book of his so far. It's a series of vignettes that really tell a broader story. No wasted space at all. Everything combines, though, to make a really strong narrative. I really like this vignette style. It keeps you engaged, interested. Sometimes with linear novel structures, I get bored, It's just like, okay, we know where this is going. We've seen this plot structure before. Since Cat's Cradle, he's also implemented more of the postmodern fragmented narrative. Jumping between time and space and place, not keeping the linear narrative, which I enjoy. While Player Piano and Sirens of Titan were more linear and straightforward. I've been thinking, and I want to do some more research on this postmodern fragmented narrative and how it really seems to suit our generation. The generation that can't focus on anything for too long, and we're bombarded with entertainment options. That generation. We can't really sit still. All of our entertainment has to be fast and fast-paced and really capture our interest. It's amazing to me that these fragmented narratives that I believe we started seeing in the 60s are still suited for today. Just something I've been thinking about. I'm no expert on fragmented narratives. I just remember when we read Slaughterhouse-Five and a few other postmodern books in college that we would discuss things like that. While reading this book full of characters who committed evil in the world, I was asking myself, who was the most evil? And there is one character who would take the cake, but Vonnegut strangely humanizes this guy. Of course, I'm talking about when Campbell meets Adolf Eichmann, the architect of Auschwitz. They meet in a jail and they have a conversation in passing. And all Eichmann wants to talk about is the writing process, because he's writing his own memoirs, of course. This was probably, there's so many good chapters, but this was probably my favorite. We didn't recognize each other, and the guards had to introduce us. Eichmann was writing the story of his life, just as I'm now writing the story of my life. That chinless old plucked buzzard, with 6 million murders to explain away, gave me a saintly smile. He was sweetly interested in his work, in me, in the guards in the prison, in everybody. He beamed at me and he said, "I'm not mad at anybody." "That's certainly the way to be," I said. "I've got some advice for you," he said. "I'd be glad to have it," I said. "Relax," he said, beaming, beaming, beaming. "Just relax." "That's how I got here," I said. "Life is divided up into phases," he said. "Each one is very different from the others, and you have to be able to recognize what is expected of you in each phase. That's the secret of successful living." "It's good of you to share the secret with me," I said. "I'm a writer now," he said. "I never thought I'd be a writer." "May I ask a personal question?" I said. "Certainly," he said benignly. "That's the phase I'm in now. This is the time for thinking and answering. Ask whatever you like." "Do you feel that you're guilty of murdering 6 million Jews?" I said. "Absolutely not," said the architect of Auschwitz, the introducer of conveyor belts into crematoria, the greatest customer in the world for the gas called Zyklon B. Eichmann then makes a joke about the murdering of 6 million Jews when he says he can spare some of those lives for Campbell's book. He seems to believe that he is completely innocent of any wrongdoing, or at least he acts like it. He may just consider himself the product of his environment. However, I found myself strangely, amused with that part of the book. Only a genius of satire, a witty, crazy author like Vonnegut would, or even could, attempt to humanize Adolf Eichmann like this. And maybe I'm completely misreading it. As you heard, Eichmann gives Campbell some advice, and if you ever wanted advice from a Nazi, just relax. Life is in phases. You just have to know what you have to be in each phase. So maybe I'm misreading it. I don't know if that's humanizing Adolf Eichmann, but I think most authors would probably like to do something different. Like, I think about what Quentin Tarantino did to Nazis in his movie. Blow them up, light them on fire, not show them in some jail cell giggling and smiling and talking about writing. But that's Vonnegut's style, man. He's just different. Campbell tells us later in that chapter what he thinks about good and bad. And he says Eichmann, and most people for that matter, cannot distinguish between right and wrong. He says right and wrong, truth and falsehood, hope and despair, beauty and ugliness, kindness and cruelty, comedy and tragedy are all processed indiscriminately, like birdshot through a bugle. He said these people, they don't know whether they're telling the truth or lying. Whereas Campbell, he always knows when he is lying. He could no more tell a lie than know he was passing a kidney stone. There's also a Jewish man named Arpad who guards Campbell while he's in prison. And one evening they're talking about the war, and Arpad brings up these things called briquettes. Briquettes are the Jews who didn't survive. Arpad survived because when the war broke out, he joined the Nazis. We are what we pretend to be, so be careful what you pretend to be. But do you blame that guy? What were his options? Either become a briquette, get killed, or join the Nazis. Be careful what you pretend to be. With Campbell's case, I think it's interesting because when he is long gone, 2 ideas of Campbell will survive: the playwright and the Nazi. There's tapes of all of his broadcasts that will survive, and then I think a Russian found a trunk full of Campbell's plays and writings, and he translated them into Russian, where they became a major success. So the beautiful playwright and the evil Nazi will both survive. His truth goes marching on. But which truth? I guess the world can decide that. Oh yeah, I guess before I end this review, I should mention the other moral of the story. Make love when you can because it's good for you. So, thanks, Uncle Kurt, for the great book. That's some great advice. Always good to remember. Make love when you can because it's good for you. Mother Night was also adapted into a film in 1999. Nick Nolte plays Campbell, Alan Arkin plays George Kraft, and John Goodman plays Frank Werdeman. I watched the film, and although I enjoyed it, it just couldn't touch the book. The book is, it stands alone as this great novel. The film was okay, I guess. So if it's between reading the book and watching the film, definitely read the book. If you like black comedy, postmodernism, satirical, minimalistic writing, and if you like Kurt Vonnegut, you're going to love this book. So yeah, Mother Night was definitely the right thing for me. Vonnegut just keeps improving and becoming even better as a novelist. Every time I read a Kurt Vonnegut novel, I'm excited for the next. And although I've already read Slaughterhouse-Five once, I'm really looking forward to that one. So that was my review of Mother Night by Kurt Vonnegut. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure I missed something, so let me know what your favorite aspects of the novel were in the comments and what you thought about the book. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button and consider subscribing. Or if you know someone who would enjoy this video, please send it along to them. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and as always, read the right thing.